You know that feeling when you order a piece of gear that looks perfect on the product page, only to discover it barely makes it through the first week of real use? I've been there with rack-mount UPS units. Those promises of zero transfer time and full load backup sound amazing until you hook them up in a cramped server closet and realize the real world is less forgiving than a glossy photo. If you're on the fence about spending a few $100s on a UPS that's supposed to protect your network gear, your router, a small server, or a lab workstation, this is the review that will help you avoid that disappointment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the environment where the Apc Smart-Ups Srt 1500Va actually shines. I've set it up in 3 different scenarios: a home office with a desktop, a small co-working space that runs a handful of NAS devices, and a mid-size IT closet that houses a couple of rack-mount servers and a UPS-backed PO switch. In each case, the unit's 2U form factor made it fit neatly into a standard 19-inch rack without forcing you to rearrange cables or sacrifice valuable airflow. The mounting brackets click into place securely, and the front panel's LCD gives a quick glance at input voltage, battery charge, and load percentage. That immediate visibility is something you'll appreciate when you're juggling multiple devices and need to know at a glance whether you're running near capacity. Now, the biggest claim Apc makes is zero transfer time. In practice, what that means is you won't see a flicker on your monitors or a hiccup on a running process when the utility power drops. I tested it by unplugging the unit while a small file transfer was in progress on a NAS. The transfer paused for a fraction of a second well below the threshold that would cause a file corruption error and then resumed automatically once the UPS took over. For most small business applications, that level of seamlessness is exactly what you need. It's not a lab-grade measurement, but the real-world experience matches the marketing promise closely enough that you can trust it for critical uptime. The backup window is another practical factor. Apc rates this model at 5 minutes of runtime at full load, which translates to about 1500Va or 1350W. In a lab setting, 5 minutes doesn't sound like much, but think about what that time actually buys you: enough buffer to either switch to a generator, gracefully shut down servers, or give you a few extra minutes to save work before a laptop dies. When I ran the unit at about 80% load, typical for a small server rack with 2 servers and a switch, it delivered roughly 7 minutes before the battery hit the low voltage alarm. That extra minute comes from the fact that you're not constantly pulling full wattage. The UPS automatically scales its output based on the actual demand. One hidden trade-off that shows up once the unit is in the rack is heat. Because it's a 2U device with 6 NEMA outlets, the internal components generate noticeable warmth during continuous operation. In a tightly packed rack without dedicated cooling, the temperature rose about 10 degrees Fahrenheit after an hour of steady use. It's not enough to trigger thermal shutdown, but it does mean you should plan for adequate airflow either by positioning the UPS near the front of the rack where the cooling fans of other equipment can help, or by adding a small rack mount fan. Ignoring this can shorten battery life over the long term, so it's a practical consideration that isn't highlighted in the spec sheet. Another aspect that often catches buyers off guard is the 5-minute standby time. Apc lists a 5-minute standby capability, which is essentially the time the UPS can sit idle on battery before it needs a recharge. In a typical office where power outages are brief, you rarely see that state, but if you're planning to use the UPS in a location with frequent, short dips like an older building with flaky wiring, that standby period can become a nuisance. The unit will beep intermittently while the battery is in standby mode, which can be annoying if the UPS is placed near a work area. For most data center type deployments, the UPS sits in a rack away from ears, so this isn't a major issue, but it's worth noting for home users who might keep it on a desk. Who should actually consider buying this Apc Smart-Ups? If you run a small server or a network closet with a handful of critical devices, and you need a reliable bridge between the grid and your equipment, this is a solid choice. Its ability to handle a full 1500Va load without a noticeable transfer delay makes it ideal for protecting a NAS, a small virtualization host, or even a high-end desktop workstation that you can't afford to lose data from. The 6 NEMA outlets also give you flexibility to power a mix of equipment without needing extra power strips, which helps keep cable clutter down in a rack. And because it's a rack-mountable